Joining me now is Douglas Murray, Associate Editor of The Spectator and the best-selling author of The War on the West. Douglas, let's start with First Minister of Scotland, Nicola Sturgeon, and her frankly absurd trans bill. Well, she's hit rock bottom and started to dig.
There are people who have opposed this bill that cloak themselves in women's rights to make it acceptable, but just as they're transphobic, you will also find that they're deeply misogynist, often homophobic, possibly some of them racist as well.
So, Douglas, if you oppose this radical, diabolical bill, you're not only a transphobe, you're a misogynist, homophobic, racist. Did I miss anything?
No, that's pretty much the list, isn't it? We've had it before from other politicians like Nicola Sturgeon. Justin Trudeau, whenever he finds someone who's inconvenient for him politically, decides that they're a member of the KKK, a misogynistic, transphobic, racist, misogynist, racist. You have politicians in Australia, of course, who've done the same thing, haven't they? Certain figures who have also decided that when somebody is mildly inconvenient to them or the world isn't going their way, says that actually all the people who are opposed to them are Nazi, misogynist, KKK, racist, homophobes and transphobes, obviously. That's just the way that a certain type of politician in the modern era thinks they can behave. And it's really delicious watching this not work for Nicola Sturgeon.
Yes, and I've got to say, for our audience here in Australia, we may be looking on and being a little bit amused by what's happening in the US and in the UK with this radical trans agenda, but at least there's a fight back over there. This bill that's been passed in Scotland, it's pretty much in place right here in Victoria, and without opposition. But the supposed Conservatives support this radical agenda. Now, you were on a program debating a very enthusiastic supporter of this agenda, Peter Tatchell, and I thought our viewers would enjoy some of your bewildered facial expressions as he tried to explain that day is night.
Of course, we must accept that he has a gender dysphoria diagnosis. That's indisputable. But you know, calling him a trans MP, I don't think he's yet a trans MP. But of course, when he is, you know, I will absolutely accept and praise that.
For these activists, this is like a religion. There's a religious zealotry behind their belief system. Is there any hope of opening their eyes to some realities?
I think so, yes. I mean, Peter Tatchell there, when he said that, you know, the person in question on that occasion had a sort of gender recognition diagnosis, and therefore you can't refute it, was particularly striking to me. You know, I think this whole story shows the difference that one man or one woman can make in the world. And, you know, the striking thing about why the discussion in Britain is much more fertile, much more productive, and actually is getting somewhere closer towards reality, is because, you know, people like the writer J.K. Rowling have come out and said, no, I don't go along with this, I can't. And these, you know, individuals speaking up makes a difference. And, you know, we saw this week Nicola Sturgeon had her own little car crash moment because she has now recognized that you can't put a two-time rapist man who says he's a woman into a woman's prison. So she said it's different on this occasion. An interviewer said to her, so why, you know, is a trans woman not a woman if they've committed rape? And that's sort of where Nicola Sturgeon had to admit she was. Well, in that case, the religious zealotry and the sort of new creed of trans women are women is falling apart, as it should, because it defies reality. But I'm sorry that there are some people who are taking an awfully long time to get there.
Oh, absolutely. And the power of one, there's an example in the US here that I'm going to play for you because there are real victims here as well. This is US swimmer Riley Gaines, who was forced to swim against a biological male identifying as female, Leah Thomas, and share a locker room also. And when she and other female swimmers complained, they were told they were the problem.
And then they were referred to the LGBTQ Education Center to educate themselves on the oppression that these athletes are dealing with. the locker room scene, because it is just so wild that you can turn around and see a 6'4" biological man pull his pants down watching you undress, and no one is willing to stick up for you.
Douglas, she was breaking up at the end there, explaining her experiences in the locker room. And I just cannot believe we're at this place where the bulk of the feminist movement is siding with the trans activists as opposed to these women who say this is not in support of women's rights. We don't feel comfortable in change rooms. We don't feel comfortable having our scholarships or our sporting positions under threat from biological males.
You know, the question that the left seems to be in trouble on here is the question of harm. They deeply fear, and understandably, harm against trans people, but they ignore then harm against women. They think that in their oppression hierarchy, trans people are more oppressed than women, therefore women should be they should just shut up. But you know, so that's their own, you know, very warped moral perspective. But I do think there's one other important point to make here, Rita, which is the sheer amount of energy that is being taken up in our time by this discussion. You know, we live in the most interconnected, advanced societies in the world. We have dreams of communication and of solving problems that our ancestors couldn't have imagined. And what are we doing in the 2020s but being caught up by these people into reopening the most basic things we've known since the dawn of our species, that there are men and women? It's not that hard. This is a result of an academy and others that believes you should problematize things but never ever solves anything.
Well said. And you've been busy this week. You've written another superb piece, this time asking how many black cops does it take to commit a white supremacist hate crime? What is the answer there?
Well, the answer, sadly, in Memphis was 5. There was this poor man, Tyree Nichols, was pulled over by police in Memphis last month, was horribly beaten, and the most appalling, just failure of policing doesn't even do justice to it. America was on tenterhooks because the poor man died several days later in hospital. America was on tenterhooks because there was a demand for the body cam footage of the police officers. And when it was released, in one way, America breathed a sigh of relief because the 5 cops who pulled over and killed, as it turned out, this man, were all themselves black. Now, you and I might think, well, that shows a problem of policing, of how policing is taught in America and much more. But that's sort of too complex for the narrative today. The narrative today is everything's got to be blamed on white supremacy when it comes to policing in America in particular. And so in no seconds flat, people like a CNN commentator said, you may think that because the cops were black, this isn't about white supremacism, but it is. You had people like Whoopi Goldberg on The View, which, you know, you can scoff at, but it's one of the most popular programs in America, saying, you know, none of this is going to be solved perhaps until we see white people being beaten up on camera. Well, the truth is you can see white people being beaten up by cops on camera. You can see footage on YouTube of the cops killing a white man in Dallas a few years ago for which nobody was ever charged. You can find this stuff, but my point is that the American race agenda in particular, which is now imported to Australia, Britain and other countries, is totally obsessed with this narrative. The only explanation for any ill-doing and any wrongdoing is white supremacy. 5 black cops kill a black man, and even then, the answer is meant to be white supremacy. I personally don't buy it, and I hope that very few other people do either.
You also wrote this week, Douglas, for the New York Post about the Chinese Communist Party's sinister influence on US universities and research institutes. You wrote they wield enormous power by not just funding these institutions and directing their research, but also by trying to turn Chinese students into agents of the communist regime. This is something former CIA Director and Secretary of State Mike Pompeo tried to highlight, but with limited success.
That's right. Mike Pompeo, the former CIA director and Secretary of State, just released a memoir. And as often, people sort of focus on the gossipy bits, the sort of stuff about Trump, stuff about Bolton and others. And I thought one of the most telling stories from it had been passed over, which was that Pompeo says that he wanted to give this speech about China, about the undermining of American sovereignty that it was doing, the undermining of American companies that the CCP is carrying out, and much more. I thought he'd do it at MIT, one of America's most prestigious universities, and was cancelled by the university. And when Pompeo called the head of the university, he admitted that it was because he knew that Mike Pompeo's speech could be critical of the Chinese Communist Party and that this would lose the university too much money. And this is a university that has taken direct grants from the Communist Party of China and its entities. So Pompeo ended up asking other universities if he could give the speech there. And, somewhere down the line, he found one that would host him. But it says something quite extraordinary about the buy-up of major institutions, not just in America, but also, of course, in Australia, New Zealand, Britain, and elsewhere. It shows something quite extraordinary that the CCP can buy up institutions so successfully and can even silence a former Secretary of State who was then the serving Secretary of State. Quite amazing.
Absolutely. I think Sweden might be onto something with banning these Confucius centres. I think that's a good first step.
Yeah.
Now, before I let you go,
Absolutely.
There's been some media speculation that Oprah has dropped Harry and Meghan. They weren't invited to her star-studded birthday. Surely this will have Harry calling his therapist like that time William broke his necklace?
I think it'll be, I think it's probably par for the course. I think most of the Sussexes circle don't know them. I can never get out of my head that story of, it was reported at the royal wedding in Windsor some years ago, which looked like a sort of A-list star-studded gala. Somebody turned to George and Amal Clooney and said, how do you know the happy couple? And they said, we don't. I think it's possible that's quite common, that all these celebrities who pretend they all know each other and sort of love each other and stand up for each other actually don't know each other at all, aren't friends. They just get seen together at star-studded occasions in public when they can sort of boost each other's image. But otherwise, no point in going around to Oprah if you need a cup of sugar, or vice versa if you're the Sussexes.
No, but that was what was so telling about the wedding, that Meghan had no one from her family there, no cousins, uncles, aunties. Obviously, we know she's got issues with her father and sister, but just her mum. That was all. And that, to me, seemed rather strange. Red flags going off. Douglas Murray, always a pleasure.
Absolutely. Great pleasure.